Nobody is coming. Not later. Not someday. Not when you finally break. There is no rescue phase in real life. No one is standing behind you, waiting to step in if you fail. No hidden safety net. No second life loading screen. If you fall, you stay down, and deep inside, you already know this. That's why your chest feels heavy at night. That's why silence feels louder than noise. That's why rest doesn't feel like rest anymore. Because somewhere along the way, you realize something most people never admit. If you stop, everything collapses. Bills don't pause. Time doesn't negotiate. Opportunity doesn't feel sympathy. And the world doesn't care how tired you are from carrying your own weight. This isn't motivation. This is reality. Finally removing the padding. Most people live like help is guaranteed. You don't. You move like one mistake costs everything. You work like there's no margin for error. You think 5 steps ahead because failure is expensive. That's not anxiety. That's awareness. And awareness changes a man. You don't grind because it's trendy. You don't work because it's inspiring. You work because if you don't, your life shrinks. You've seen what happens when people hesitate too long. They don't crash dramatically. They fade. Dreams downgrade. Standards lower. Self-respect erodes quietly. And one day, they look in the mirror and don't recognize who they became. You refuse to be that. Not because you're special, but because you understand consequences. You understand that nobody is tracking your effort. Nobody is counting how hard this is. Nobody is impressed by your potential. There's only output, results or excuses, movement or decay. That's the rule set. The lie most men live with. Here's the problem nobody wants to say out loud. Most men are still moving like someone will save them. They talk about burnout while living with backups. They talk about mental space while someone else carries the risk. They talk about finding balance while having nothing on the line. That's why they can afford to slow down. You can't, because you don't have a cushion. No fallback identity. No emergency plan that doesn't cost your pride. No version of your life where mediocrity feels acceptable. If you fail, you don't just lose money, you lose momentum. You lose leverage. You lose the version of yourself you fought to build. And rebuilding from zero is heavier the second time. Why this pressure never leaves you? You wake up already behind, not because you slept too much, but because time is always ahead of you. There's always more to do. Always something slipping. Always another standard to meet. And the worst part? You can't talk about it. Because explaining pressure sounds like weakness to people who don't carry it. So you stay quiet. You work, you internalize stress, and convert it into structure. Schedules, rules, systems. Not because you love discipline, but because chaos costs too much. You've learned that motivation is unreliable. Energy fluctuates. Mood lies. But structure survives bad days. So you build your life like failure is unaffordable. Because for you, it is. Here's what separates you from everyone else. They think effort earns sympathy. You know effort only earns survival. They wait to feel ready. You move while uncertain. They slow down when it hurts. You tighten your routine, not because you're fearless, but because fear without action turns into regret. And regret is heavier than exhaustion. You've already paid that price once. You won't again. So you keep going. Not loudly, not dramatically, relentlessly. Because you understand something most never will. When nobody is coming, quitting is a luxury. And you don't live a luxury life. You don't live with fear. You live with a calculation. Every move you make runs through the same filter. If this fails, what breaks? Not emotionally, logistically, rent, time, momentum, reputation, self-trust. You don't panic, because panic wastes energy. You stay alert, because mistakes are expensive. That's the difference. Most people confuse your intensity with anxiety. They're wrong. Anxiety's loud. What you carry is quiet, controlled, measured, permanent. The backup illusion. Here's the truth nobody admits. Backups change behavior. When people believe something will catch them, they hesitate longer. They tolerate less pain. They quit earlier. They don't say it out loud, but their body knows. Their nervous system knows. They move softer. They negotiate with discomfort. They slow down when it gets ugly. Because deep down, they feel protected. You don't have that feeling. You move like every decision echoes. Because it does. Why you can't take it easy? People tell you to slow down. They say things like, don't be so hard on yourself. You're doing enough. Rest a little. They mean well, but they don't understand the math of your life. If you rest too long, progress reverses. If you ease up, discipline leaks. If you pause, momentum dies. And momentum is fragile. It takes months to build, seconds to lose. You've watched it happen before. Not dramatically, quietly. One skip day, one excuse, one delayed decision. Then suddenly, you're behind again. You refuse to relive that. Pressure is not the enemy. Pressure didn't show up to hurt you. It showed up to replace confusion. Pressure simplified everything. When there's no backup, priorities become clear. You stop asking, what do I feel like doing? You start asking, what keeps this moving? Comfort stops mattering. Clarity replaces motivation. Action replaces thought. You don't need inspiration. You need execution. And pressure delivers that. The loneliness that comes with it. This mindset isolates you. Not because you want distance, but because most conversations feel pointless. Small talk feels fake. Complaints sound weak. Excuses feel offensive. Not because you're arrogant, but because you've seen what excuses cost. So you withdraw. You don't explain your schedule. You don't justify your intensity. You don't announce your goals. You just move. Quietly. Consistently. Without applause. Because validation doesn't pay interest. Why this weight never leaves. Even on good days. The pressure doesn't disappear. Success doesn't relax you. It sharpens you. Because now there's something to protect. Standards, reputation, identity. You're no longer afraid of failure. You're afraid of regression. Becoming slower, softer, less precise. You've built too much to drift backward. So you stay alert. Not paranoid, prepared. There was a moment. Quiet, uncomfortable. When you understood something. No one is tracking this but you. No one will notice if you underperform today. No one will stop you from wasting potential. No one will intervene if you lower standards. The only punishment is internal. Regret, self-disgust, loss of self-trust. And that punishment lasts longer than physical exhaustion ever could. So you choose tired over ashamed. Discipline over comfort. Structure over chaos. Every time. This is why you can't relate anymore. You're not better than others. You're just operating under different consequences. They can afford to drift. You can't. They can experiment. You must execute. They can wait for motivation. you move without it. Because waiting costs you more than working. This isn't about ambition. This is about survival with standards. This is what happens when a man realizes no one is coming, and nothing will be forgiven. How pressure rewires a man. Pain didn't make you emotional. It made you efficient. At some point, you stopped reacting and started adjusting. You noticed patterns. You studied your own failures. You watched what slowed you down and cut it out. Not dramatically, systematically. You removed habits. You removed people. You removed excuses you once defended. Because pain teaches faster when there's no backup. People say, "You're different now." They say it like an accusation. But what they really mean is, you no longer move in ways I understand. You don't over-explain. You don't argue. You don't seek agreement. Because agreement doesn't move anything forward. You became quieter. Not because you lost confidence, but because noise stopped serving a purpose. Words became tools. Silence became leverage. Why emotions stopped running the show. There was a time when emotions controlled your decisions. Bad mood, you slowed down. Doubt, you waited. Fear, you avoided risk. That version of you couldn't survive your current life. So pressure intervened. Pressure taught you that emotions are weather. They change, they pass, they lie. Systems don't. So you built systems. Wake times, work blocks, non-negotiables. Rules you follow even when you don't feel like it. Well, especially when you don't feel like it. Discipline wasn't a goal. It was a consequence. You didn't wake up wanting discipline. You woke up needing control. Control over time. Control over output. Control over direction. Because without control, everything slips. And slipping is expensive. So you tightened your grip. Not out of obsession, out of necessity. Why you stopped seeking comfort. Comfort became suspicious. Comfort meant stagnation. Comfort meant delay. Comfort meant excuses pretending to be self-care. You learned that comfort feels good today and costs you tomorrow. So you stopped chasing it. Not because you enjoy suffering, but because suffering at least pays. Pain builds tolerance. Discomfort builds precision. Pressure builds focus. Comfort builds nothing. You used to explain yourself. Why you're tired, why you're busy, why you can't slow down. Then one day, you realize explanations are requests for permission. And you don't need permission to take responsibility for your own life. So you stopped explaining. Not out of arrogance, out of clarity. Your schedule doesn't need approval. Your standards don't need validation. Your pace doesn't need consensus. Why you don't celebrate wins. You hit milestones. You reach goals. You see progress. And you barely react. Not because you're ungrateful, but because celebration feels premature. You know how fragile momentum is. You've seen people relax too early. You've seen success make them soft. You've seen confidence turn into carelessness. You refuse that trade. Progress is acknowledged. Then work resumes. No victory laps, no emotional spikes, just continuation. This is where the distance comes from. People feel you pulling away. They say you're cold. They say you're intense. They say you're too serious. They don't see the cost behind that seriousness. They don't see how many nights you stayed consistent while motivation disappeared. They don't see how many times you chose discipline over distraction. They only see the result and assume it was personality. It wasn't. It was pressure. You didn't become this version of yourself because you wanted to. You became this version because the alternative was unacceptable. Being average, being dependent, being replaceable. being stagnant. Those outcomes felt heavier than exhaustion ever could. So you adapted, and adaptation hardens you. You're not broken. You're calibrated. This isn't damage. This is calibration. Your tolerance is higher. Your patience is lower. Your standards are sharper. You don't chase highs. You avoid lows. You don't need constant excitement. You need consistency. That's not dullness. That's precision. This is what happens when pressure stays long enough to change the shape of a man. Not loudly, not proudly. Permanently. You didn't solve this by feeling better. You solved it by removing emotion from the decision-making process. That's the shift most people never make. They wait to want to act. You act because not acting costs too much. That difference is everything. Rule 1, you stopped asking, how do I feel? At some point you realize feelings are unreliable data. Some days you feel sharp. Some days you feel hollow. Some days you feel unstoppable. Some days you feel behind before the day even starts. If action depended on emotion, your output would be inconsistent. So you remove the question entirely. You don't ask, do I feel like it? Chichi. You ask, what is scheduled? What is required? What moves us forward today? Emotion became background noise. Execution became the signal. Rule 2. You built a life that moves even when you don't. You stopped relying on willpower. Willpower burns out, systems don't. So you designed your days so momentum doesn't require effort. Same wake time, same work window, same non-negotiables. Not because it's exciting, but because it reduces friction. When decisions are automated, hesitation disappears. You don't negotiate with yourself anymore. Negotiation creates delay. Delay creates decay. You don't allow that. Rule 3. You lowered emotional input, not standards. Most people think the solution to pressure is doing less. You learn the opposite. You reduced emotional investment, not responsibility. You stopped attaching your identity to every outcome. Bad day? You still execute. Good day? You still execute. Results fluctuate. Standards don't. That's how you stay stable in unstable conditions. Rule 4. You separated self-worth from comfort. This was a hard one. You were taught that rest equals care, that ease equals balance, that discomfort means something is wrong. You learn the truth the hard way. Discomfort often means you're aligned. Comfort often means you're drifting. So you stopped using comfort as a signal of correctness. You use output instead. If the work is done, the day counts. Even if it hurt, even if it was quiet, even if no one noticed. Rule 5. You work small, not dramatic. You don't chase massive bursts of effort. Burnout lives there. You work in controlled increments. Repeatable, predictable, enough intensity to progress, enough restraint to sustain. You understand something most don't. Consistency compounds faster than intensity. So you protect consistency at all costs, even on days when you feel empty, especially then. Rule 6. You stopped waiting for clarity. Clarity used to feel important. Now it feels optional. You've learned that clarity usually follows action, not the other way around. Movement reveals information. Stillness creates doubt. So you move. Not recklessly, deliberately. One step at a time, adjusting as you go. Because waiting for certainty is just fear dressed as patience. Rule 7. You built rules, not goals. Goals move the finish line. Rules keep you moving. You don't say, I'll work hard this month. You say, I don't miss sessions. You don't say, I'll stay disciplined. You say, I follow the schedule. Rules remove interpretation. Interpretation creates excuses. So you eliminated interpretation. Why this works when motivation fails. Motivation is emotional. Your system is mechanical. Motivation needs energy. Your system runs on obligation. Motivation asks for belief. Your system only needs compliance. You don't need to believe in yourself today. You just need to follow the rules you set when you were thinking clearly. That's how you survive low states without lowering standards. You don't feel confident in a loud way. You feel stable. You trust your process, even when results lag. You trust your structure, even when mood collapses, because you've seen it work before, over time, without drama, without applause. That's real confidence. This is how you function when motivation disappears. Not by forcing emotion, but by removing it. How you prevent regression. You already know how to work. The real battle now is not losing what you built, because progress is fragile. Regression is aggressive, and it waits for comfort. Rule 8. You don't balance life, you prioritize it. Balance sounds healthy. In reality, a balance is what people say when they're afraid to commit fully. You learn this the hard way. Nothing meaningful was ever built in perfect balance, so you stop chasing it. You don't divide your energy equally. You concentrate it. Some seasons demand obsession. Some seasons demand sacrifice. Some seasons demand isolation. You accept that, because balance preserves comfort, not momentum. And momentum is your lifeline. Rule 9. Rest is scheduled, not emotional. Most people rest when they feel tired. That's how discipline collapses. You rest when it's planned. Rest is maintenance, not escape. You don't use exhaustion as an excuse to disengage. You use rest to protect performance. There's a difference. You rest to return sharper, not softer. Rule 10. You watch for soft signals. Regression never announces itself. It arrives quietly, sleeping a little later, skipping preparation, letting standards slide just this once, replacing structure with mood. You learn to catch these early, because small compromises become permanent habits if left unchecked. So you intervene immediately. No emotion, no debate. Correction happens fast. Rule 11. You don't trust comfortable versions of yourself. This one took time to learn. The version of you that feels comfortable is not the version that built this life. Comfort makes you forget consequences. Ease makes you forget urgency. Stability makes you forget hunger. So you don't let comfort drive decisions. You listen, but you don't obey. Rule 12. You reduce input as responsibility grows. As your responsibility increased, you reduce stimulation. Less noise, less opinions, less consumption. Because clarity requires silence. You stopped flooding your mind with information you don't need. You protect your focus like a resource, because distraction is subtle sabotage. Rule 13. You measure days by output, not feelings. You don't ask, was today enjoyable? You ask, was today effective? Did something move forward? Did the standard hold? Did discipline show up? If yes, the day counts. Feelings are temporary. Output compounds. You remember who you were before structure. The indecision, the inconsistency, the internal noise. You don't romanticize that version. You learn that freedom without discipline becomes chaos. So you choose constraints. Constraints give shape. Shape gives direction. Direction gives power. The silent edge you now carry. You don't need to prove intensity. You don't need to announce discipline. You don't need recognition. Your edge is internal. It shows up in how you wake up, How you execute? How you don't flinch when it's boring. That's rare. And rarity compounds. Why most people can't live this way? This life doesn't reward ego, it rewards restraint. There's no constant praise, no immediate payoff, no emotional highs. Just slow accumulation. Most people quit there. You didn't, not because you're tougher, but because you understand what regression costs. At this point, this isn't a phase. It's an operating system. The line you don't cross back. This is where it stops being content. This is where it becomes a line. Because everything you've heard so far means nothing. If you go back to living like someone will save you, nobody is coming. Not to correct your mistakes, not to slow time down, not to reduce the cost of bad decisions. And the sooner you stop pretending otherwise, the faster your life stabilizes. This is the moment most people turn away. Right here. Not because it's confusing, but because it's uncomfortable. Because this part removes the last excuse. The idea that someone will understand, something will change. Eventually it will get easier. It won't. It only gets clearer. Clearer consequences. Clearer responsibility. Clearer ownership. And clarity demands action. You don't need another strategy. You don't need another video. You don't need another explanation. You already know what you're avoiding, what you're delaying, what you're capable of but not executing. That awareness is not a gift. It's a responsibility. Because once you see it, you don't get to unknow it. There are two types of people. Those who live like outcomes are negotiable, and those who live like outcomes are earned. You already chose which one you are. The moment you stayed when things got heavy, now you have to honor that choice. Every day. Not loudly, not publicly, relentlessly. No backup doesn't mean recklessness. It means precision. It means you don't leave decisions unfinished. You don't let days drift. You don't rely on motivation to carry responsibility. You don't need confidence. You need compliance. You don't need belief. You need follow-through. The world doesn't reward potential. It never has. Potential is invisible. Intentions don't register. Struggle doesn't earn credit. Only output changes position. Only consistency creates leverage. Only discipline builds freedom. Everything else is noise. This is where most people misunderstand strength. Strength isn't intensity. Strength is showing up without excitement, without recognition, without emotional payoff. Strength is repeating the same standards on days that feel empty. Strength is not lowering the bar just because nobody is watching. You don't need to become someone new. You don't need a new personality. You don't need a new identity. You don't need a new story. You need to commit to the version of yourself that already knows what to do and execute without negotiation. That's it. Not success, not happiness, not ease. Stability, self-respect, predictability, control. Knowing that even on bad days, you don't fall apart. Knowing that when pressure increases, you don't disappear. Knowing that if everything goes quiet, you still move. From this point forward, there are no excuses you respect. Only standards you follow. You don't wait. You don't drift. You don't ask permission. You execute. Because nobody is coming. And you don't need them to. If this hit, it's because you're already living this way. You just hadn't named it yet. Now you have, and once it's named, it's enforced.